Your host, Sam Vecini. We are presented by The Athletic. Today, it is a special NBA rookie extensions bonanza episode. It's a three-parter. The first part, as you can see here, if you're watching on YouTube, in beautiful black and white, coming to you from the Bay Area, it's Danny Leroux. Couldn't be more excited.
It's like sepia tone. It's like sepia tone without actually having a filter on. It's just the nature of how I'm choosing to live my life in this exact moment in time.
Like, I'm so glad that the YouTube viewer is going to be able to see it like this, so that like I'm not just getting this alone, where you literally are almost in black and white, like you're literally in the third man, or I guess it's over that shoulder, like my poster behind me. The second part of this episode is going to be with Kelly Eco. We're going to talk about the crazy Kevin Porter extension that broke my brain, as I'm sure it broke Danny's brain. We might end up touching on it just a little bit here in this segment. And then the third segment is the DeAndre Hunter extension that happened. We're going to talk about that with Brad Rowland. Both of those segments are already extended. They're already published up on YouTube. The full podcast episode is going up into your feeds as you have clicked on Wednesday morning, Tuesday night. Danny, I'm glad that we got a chance to talk, because this is kind of a weird extension year. It feels like a lot of the big deals, as usual, got done early. You can always expect the max deals to get done, and I'll list off a big list of the first round deals here in a moment. But it felt like a weird year. There were only 2 deals that got done on extension day. A lot of the deals got done a bit early or just didn't happen at all, in the case of someone like Grant Williams, P.J. Washington, Cam Johnson, for a number of factors. What is your overall takeaway about this extension window?
So this window is shaped so far more than any other by the upcoming national TV deal. And so one way to think about it, so unless you're getting a full max, like a 25% or higher, you cannot get you cannot get 5 new years. So we're really talking about 4-year and theoretically fewer contracts. This is a really fun extension year because, so not counting the current one, when you add 4 new years, half of them are going to be on the current TV deal and half of them are going to be on the new one. We do not know yet, what the actual terms of that national TV deal are going to be. The expectations are super high right now, potentially 2.5 to 3 times the revenue from that part of it. That's not the whole pie, but it's a big part of the pie. And then so you have that component in there. And we don't also know how that revenue is going to be implemented in terms of the salary cap itself. So is it going to be they try to flatten it a little bit and then just send out money to the players? Do they do a spike again or something else? But so you have all of that. And that's one important context here. So that's why teams in many circumstances could be more aggressive going for these extensions, because
and I do also want to note the idea potentially of expansion, which Adam Silver has been very clear about having an interest in, let's say. Whether or not that comes in 2 years, 3 years, 4 years down the road, I think remains to be seen.
Right. And so that's a component of it as well that could theoretically expand the pool. Those teams probably don't have a ton of obligations on the books. I think that's going to be more for next year and the year after, because then those players could hit restricted free agency when those teams exist. So that could be, because my thought is they're going to line up this TV deal and then they're going to talk about expansion, get the fees and all that fun stuff, which is interesting.
And on top of it as well, there's this idea that, like, will teams that expand like for the first time, will they get into the pie for the first couple of years that they're there?
Sure.
When the Bobcats came in, they had 66% of the salary cap as opposed to the full salary cap. So, like, there's a lot to play out there. I think is the best way to put it.
Just one quick note along that. I'm not privy to all of this, and there could be elements in these negotiations that are outside of this, but like, it seems like the likelihood is that if there are expansion teams, it'll be Seattle and or Las Vegas. Seattle is a top market. You would to me, if you were selling that to the broadcast groups, whether that's the existing ones or Amazon, Google, whoever's going to get in the bidding, you'd want to say, hey, we're going to have a team in Seattle. You can do this. But maybe they do that kind of wink, wink, nudge, nudge. We don't have one yet, but our expectation, I don't know how that changes the offers, or maybe, and I know that the other owners want to wait, because then it gets more leverage. Like, if you agree to the deal and then you add them in, then you can put these constraints. But if they're in and then the deal happens, then it's harder. But so from the team perspective, that's an important part of this equation, is the idea that that things could be going up. And so we'll talk about Brandon Clark and a few of these other ones that are really interesting from that perspective. From the player's perspective, extensions are always about mitigation of risk. And so what that means is you're getting life-changing money. A lot of times people who have never had anything close to this in their lives a year early. And you could ask various different players about the things that can go wrong in the year, even if things are looking good for you. And so, and the thing about the rising tide of all of this money is $20 million, $25 million. That's a lot to turn down. Yeah, maybe you'll get 25 or 30 or something else like that, but it's hard. Like, this is incredible money. Yeah. This will make your life a lot better. And the marginal difference between your 24th and 25th million dollars is very different than your first and second.
Right. That's 100% right. I do just want to list off the extensions that did get done. Zion Williamson got done. Max deal with some injury protections, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, I still think we don't know all of that publicly, but maybe it's been out there. I was in Europe for 5 weeks.
John Morant, a full boat max. RJ Barrett, 4 years, 107, if I remember correctly.
That sounds right, yeah.
DeAndre Hunter, 4 years, $90 million with $5 million in incentives. Darius Garland, a full boat max. Let's see here. Tyler Hero, 4 years, 120 with some incentives. Going down the list, Brandon Clark, 4 years, $52 million with some incentives, not many incentives there. Nasir Little with a 4-year, $28 million extension. That one blew my mind a little bit. Jordan Poole, 4-year, $122 million extension. Keldon Johnson was like a 4-year, $70 million extension with a couple of incentives there. Kevin Porter with the 4-year, $82 million deal, which has a bizarre structure that is like $16 million guaranteed with opt-out dates, as we'll talk about with Kelly Eco. It seems like those dates are only on the Houston side as opposed to being on the Kevin Porter side.
And did you mention DeAndre Hunter?
I did. 4 years.
Okay, I maybe missed that. Yeah.
So those are the deals that got done. That means guys like Matisse Thybulle, 2 times all defense, Grant Williams, terrific role player, Cam Johnson, P.J. Washington, Jackson Hayes was a starter on a playoff team last year, sort of, I guess. None of these deals got done. And I can see why, because these guys have kind of wild cardy years coming up for a number of reasons. Let's talk about the guys that got deals done first, though. Is there a deal that stands out to you beyond the max guys? Like, I don't even know how interesting it is to talk about John Morant, Zion Williamson. Of course, those deals were going to get done on some level. Is there a deal that stands out to you outside of the max guys?
Yeah, I mean, we're going to have to see how they work out, but Jordan Poole and Tyler Hero, the 2 Wisconsin kids, are going to be joined at the hip for a long time because they have similar strengths and weaknesses as players, and they also are on very good teams right now. And so, they got similar money. And for the question with both of them is, how impactful are they as playoff performers? Like, so they're wonderful regular season floor raisers that can do stuff with the ball in their hands and are actually sometimes underappreciated catch and shoot guys, but they're also extremely limited defensively. And they also have been they're surrounded by other really good players. And so you have this question of what are they when you need more of them? And also, are you going to need more of them? Because the Warriors have a lot of really good players. We don't know how Steph Curry and Andrew Wiggins and Draymond Green and Klay Thompson are going to age, much less be on the team. Same story with Jimmy Butler and Kyle Lowry and everyone else in Miami. Bam, of course. So they're really interesting because you're trying to do 2 different things as the team and the player here. So as the team, you're trying to make an offer that the player will actually accept, which is an important thing. Like if that's part of a goal, but you also don't want to get too close to the offer sheet number. And so what that basically is that it's the 25% max theoretically for that year, and then 5% raises each year after. So like the example this year was DeAndre Ayton. So that's what DeAndre Ayton signed an offer sheet with the Pacers, which the Suns matched in like 5 minutes or whatever it was. And so the reason why that matters for the team is the idea of risk mitigation. I talked about it a lot for the player, but for the team, because if you're signing the player to basically the same money they could get a year later, yeah, you might do that to make them happy. And there is value in that. We've seen that over the years, including with the aforementioned DeAndre Ayton. But you're taking on a lot of risk as the team because you're committing to this a year early. And you do that for John Morant. You do that for Zion Williamson because they're amazing. But do you do that for Tyler Hero or Jordan Poole? Less so. And so those were really interesting negotiations. They ended up pretty close to that 25% based on the current estimates, but not all the way there, like 5-6 million short. But then they get higher raises because it's the 8% because they're with their current team. So they're, it's a modest amount less. And so that was a really interesting part of this equation for these players who are simultaneously established and valuable, but not stars, not cornerstones.
Yeah, this draft in general has a lot of those guys. The 2019 draft we're talking about. There have only been 3 all-star level players in this class thus far: Zion Williamson, John Morant, Darius Garland. I'll be honest with you, I don't know how many more we're going to get. Like, Tyler Hero could sneak one. Jordan Poole could sneak one. I don't know if I see that for DeAndre Hunter. RJ Barrett, I think, has a real shot to sneak one at some point. But in general, like, there is a chance that we look back on this class and there are 3 all-stars, which would be very below average for a draft class. I think the number is typically about 6. That's not to say it's like a terrible draft class or anything, but I think it ended up being a pretty difficult draft class to evaluate, if only because, you look at the 3 guys that went 28, 29, 30, they ended up getting pretty big extensions. And the 2 that stood out to me were Keldon Johnson and DeAndre Hunter.
That's totally fair.
By any stretch of the imagination, Keldon Johnson's been a better player than DeAndre Hunter so far. But this is something that Brad Rowland and I will talk about. The idea of draft position tends to be pretty sticky in these rookie extension deals.
Yes, it does.
If Keldon Johnson had gone 4th overall and had done what he's done thus far in his career, there's no way he's signing for 470. He's signing for like 120. Pretty easy, right?
Yeah, I think that's pretty reasonable. And I mean, it'll be interesting to see how things like Keldon Johnson's 3-point percentage change over the years. So Keldon Johnson last year made 40% of 5 threes a game. Like that's pretty good. I mean, the volume was a big uptick from where he was early in his career. If that's real, then we're talking about a fascinating player, and where he fits in and where he fits in defensively with this Spurs team is also really notable. And yeah, the stickiness, and especially, and this, but it's important to emphasize, when the person who drafted that player is the person negotiating the extension.
Yeah.
Because
that's another DeAndre Hunter point as well.
Right. I talk about how, like, restricted free agency is about falling in love for other bidders, but it's also about that for extensions, because it's like the more you believe, and you believed in them in the first place because you're the one who did it, then the more likely you are to go there. That's part of the reason I was surprised a Rui Hachimura deal didn't get done, because Tommy Shepard really believes in his guys for pretty hard. And I was a little bit, but part of that might have just been the uncertainty with Rui and his role and everything else. So yeah, I think those are really interesting, the stickiness there. And that ties in with something that I think is going to be was looming in the background for a lot of these extensions with the Poole and Hero and Keldon and DeAndre Hunter, like we just talked about, is the teams that could potentially have cap space in 2023. And overwhelmingly, these aren't the good teams. This isn't like the Warriors in 16 having the space for Kevin Durant or anything else. These are teams like the Rockets and the Pacers and potentially the Orlando Magic, who are intriguing young teams, but also teams that are young and trying to get better. And so it could actually be, depending on what Troy Weaver and a couple of the other variables in this do, Weaver, the general manager of the Pistons, a circumstance where Jordan Poole or DeAndre Hunter or Keldon Johnson would be the apple of one of their eyes. And then that's when you start to get into some real problems as the team in question. And because if the cap looks like it's going up, and maybe we have a TV deal reported or anything like that, or the teams know and we don't, and they're like, oh, this is going to go crazy. Like, anything we sign these guys to an offer sheet is going to look great. And so then that is a very real risk. And I think that Like John Hollinger, our colleague at The Athletic, had talked about how they're like, basically it would be very hard to sign a bad extension this year from the team perspective. I wouldn't go quite that far, but I think that there were teams that were very willing to play ball. And I think the Hawks, surprisingly, in the deal that came kind of like after the deadline, or at least was announced after the deadline, was one of those that fit that description.
Yeah, it is interesting trying to navigate essentially like the sunk cost of what someone has spent already, right? Like the Hawks not only like really loved DeAndre Hunter in the draft, but they paid quite a bit to get him. Like they traded up from number 8 to number 4 and gave up like additional assets. I think they gave up 16 because they gave up the Nickeil Alexander-Walker pick, and then gave up like another first round pick to get DeAndre Hunter. So like they're committed to the DeAndre Hunter experience. On the other side, the Rockets are not really committed to the Kevin Porter experience. They literally gave up nothing to get Kevin Porter. And they signed him to this deal that completely broke my brain when I first saw it, in terms of the structure, where it is essentially, as I'm going to talk about Kelly Iko, it is a football contract. Like it is a deal that's $16 million guaranteed for the first year, and then they can get out of it at any point. This is, I'm going to go into it more with Kelly, but I have to get your thoughts on this, if only because this is like a cap nerd's dream, as like a weirdo deal that could be a crazy trade chip, that could be a crazy let's just get out of jail free card if it doesn't work out with Kevin Porter. There are just so many different things here that kind of come into play.
There are. And I thought that a Porter Jr. extension would not happen, in part because of the uncertainty surrounding him, not only his role on the court. I think Porter Jr. is better off ball than on ball, and the Rockets just haven't really had the right guys to play off him. Jalen Green, if he takes a huge step this year, could actually be that foil, which I'm excited about. But also because of the off-court stuff, which has been well reported and everything over the years. And that's a part of why Cleveland let him go for nothing. And, you know, as good as they are right now, like if Cleveland had another player as good as him, they probably wouldn't have, for example, traded for Caris LeVert. Like that's sort of a circumstance. So with Porter, with the way I like to think about trades with non-guarantees or like guarantees is in terms of decision points and decision dates. And what I think is so fascinating, you brought up this as a football contract. I think that's a fair comparison, because what happens here is there are a couple of different decision points that the Rockets will have. And then it's also like, how big is the decision? And so we don't have all of the details here. I'm sure you'll get into some of it with Kelly Iko. He's fantastic. But it seems like one of them is going to be at the end of this year. So this year happens. They can get out of it scot-free. But if they decide we want more Kevin Porter Jr., then you're going to have to commit to, I think it's multiple years is the preliminary reporting that I've seen. If you want one more year, you get 2 at the valuation, let's call it 17, 18 million. And that's good for Porter because it's the idea that you're committing to a more significant part of it than a bunch of this contract gets guaranteed. But it's also a significant risk because the Rockets have a ton of cap space. They could be looking at a very different present and future at that point, depending on how Şengün and Green and everybody else looks. So it's a real risk for both sides. It kind of, in a way, reminds me of the Josh Hart contract, which I also loved because of the weird stuff where Josh Hart, we haven't gotten to this part of it yet, but he has a non-guaranteed player option, which means that he can opt in or opt out. But then if he opts in, the contract is still not guaranteed. So it's the closest the NBA has ever gotten to a mutual option, which I actually think they should go to, but it's not in the current collective bargaining agreement. But yeah, so for Porter, it's these different decision points. And so it seems like one of them is going to be after this year. And I think that part of the reason they agreed on this structure of these decision points is that it keeps the pressure on to an extent where it's like, okay, you're getting a lot of money for 2 years from now. Like you're getting, or sorry, I should correct it. That extension, because it's an extension. So this year's locked in and they locked in next year. So the decision point will be 2 seasons from now. Apologies for that mistake. But then you have to keep on things to make sure things are going well in order to get the rest of your money. And for the Rockets, it's paralleling to an extent the Joel Embiid situation where Nate Duncan and I, when we saw it, we went, oh, this is basically a guaranteed contract because the only way out of it is by letting him go entirely. Right. And that's a complicated thing. And so it's not, and partially because NBA contracts don't allow this, like that point where it's not guaranteed after the first year of the extension. So that's 2 years, that this year, next year, and then it's non-guaranteed, is you're letting him go. Like you're going through the waiver process, and maybe you have cap space to bring him back a different number, but like it's really an all or nothing proposition. And
Right.
so it's not Joel Embiid where like they basically had to make that decision a year early and we knew how good he was. Like with Porter, there is a much more significant chance that they just walk away from it. But he benefits from that, where it's like, especially if the cap numbers look like it's getting higher, it's like, okay, well then he might be getting like significantly more money than some of his brethren in this draft class, despite not having, at least in my eyes, earned it to this point.
Yeah, it's an interesting situation that I'm still trying to navigate.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the guys that didn't.
Oh, sure. Let's go there.
Yeah, the guys that didn't get extensions.
I think a lot of.
Is there someone who stands out?
Probably Grant Williams. And Grant Williams is a hard guy to calibrate value because it's primarily defense and low volume 3-point shooting, which he's catnip for me. I'm a big Grant Williams fan. I thought he was an important part of a wonderful defensive ensemble in Boston last year. And he also is going to have a lot of opportunity this year with Robert Williams missing time to start the year, with Danilo Gallinari out for presumably the entire regular season with that torn ACL. And so Williams is going to get that opportunity. So there is the chance that it's like, oh my God, he's just a starter. Like he gets starter money, and starter money is going to start moving up. We're getting closer to 20 to 25 million a year for starters. Yeah. But there's also a chance that people are like, oh, he's just a cog in the machine. This is Jalen and Jason Tatum, and to a lesser extent, Marcus Smart, maybe even Robert Williams, depending on how his season goes. So I think that for Williams, it's sort of a parallel in a way to Miles Bridges. Obviously, we hope there are no parallels after that fourth year to Miles Bridges. But the idea being that it's possible the Celtics just wanted to do something like with Robert Williams, where, hey, this is a contract that even if this year doesn't go great, we'll be happy with it. And then if it goes great, then we're going to have one of the steals of the last couple of years. And Grant Williams is like, well, you know, the difference for me between 12 million or 14 or whatever they were offering and 8 million isn't that much. And I could get 20. And so that upside was tantalizing and interesting. And also, like, there's a weird element of this with restricted free agency for some of these guys with that have an uncertain presence on maybe they're interested in seeing what's out there, seeing the offer sheet market and everything else. And like, so, I mean, PJ Washington is going to be thrust into a larger role this year on the Hornets than we expected for a variety of different reasons. But maybe he wants the possibility of, you know, not being in Charlotte or having a team be really interested in him, negotiating a sign and trade. And like, as much as Lonzo Ball has been injured, I think that Lonzo Ball, like, that worked out pretty well for Lonzo. He ended up in a place that really wanted him. He ended up on a team that had a vision for him as a player. And remember, like, PJ and Grant Williams in particular, they might be going back at some point to not having the roles they're going to have this year. So getting that time to really see where things are could be very useful for them.
The Grant Williams one is interesting to me because what did you think what would a bargain for Grant Williams be for you?
I'm a big believer. I thought that if you could get him for 15 million or less, that will look good in time. Even if Grant Williams is the third big man, so the first one off the bench, that's going to be 15 million a year, like a year or two from now. So that's like good backup money, but like mid-level exception money for that.
That's what I thought. Like, I thought that like 14 million, like if you could get him at 14 or like 13 and a half. So somewhere between, let's say 52 and $55 million a year. Let's even just throw 55 on it. 4 years, 55 million. That deal is a win to me. And I kind of got the impression that like that wasn't even on the table from Boston.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. And I mean, you get into these situations where teams have a lot of other obligations. And I mean, we can talk about the Warriors situation if you want, but like context matters here. And like, that was actually what made the DeAndre Hunter extension so fascinating is the preliminary numbers on that. When I kind of like worked it out, they're basically at the tax for next year with everything in. And that includes Bogdan Bogdanovic opting in. And for the Celtics, like this team is already really expensive. And so what they might be thinking is we get this time to evaluate. We can see where things go. Maybe he gets more expensive, but if he has a good year, then we're happy to pay him. And if he has a really good year, then we're probably doing something different with Al Horford. And so you can make that decision at that point. And they also Grant Williams, as much as I like him, I don't think he's going to become like a ball in his hands, 20-point a game scorer. And generally speaking, low volume defense first guys don't get a ton of interest restricted free agency. And you don't
think about this. Mikal Bridges is getting paid less than DeAndre Hunter.
Right. And I mean, some of that is the context of the extra year close to the TV deal, but part of that is just the situation that happens. And you don't have to look any further than Grant Williams' current teammate, Marcus Smart, who everybody knew he was a good defender. We worried about questioned about what he was offensively. Was he a point guard? Was he not? And he just got squeezed out. Danny Ainge is just like, you're not going to get anything. And he didn't. And that worked out very well for the Celtics. And so it's as weird as it is, like, I think Grant Williams right now, like he's a very good basketball player, but and the weird thing about that is, like, I'm really thrilled for Colin Sexton that he got his money in restricted free agency, because he didn't get as much as if he had never gotten injured, but he still did pretty well on that sign and trade with the Jazz. But part of that, I think how that worked was scoring is something that teams will always value, at least to some extent. And Grant Williams doesn't do a lot of that. And so that's going to be a question mark. And I think those are dice that Brad Stevens is willing to roll.
I'm glad you brought up a second ago the idea of sometimes players might not want to negotiate with teams and might be looking at it as a potential avenue to leave, despite the fact that the team will have restricted free agency rights on them. I don't know that PJ Washington is in that position. I have no idea. Maybe PJ Washington like 100% wants to be there, but Charlotte seems like a mess right now. Like, let's just be real with it, right? Charlotte does not seem like a great spot. This is and this is all hypothetical, I'm saying here, like restricted free agency sometimes is a good opportunity to be able to either just get a crazy amount of money or to leave and to hopefully be able to negotiate your departure in a smart way. I have no idea if PJ Washington wants to leave Charlotte or not. I think it would be pretty reasonable for PJ Washington to be looking at Charlotte. They haven't really figured out how to utilize him in 3 years yet, it seems like to me. I think he's good. When I've seen him, I think that he's a good defender. He can shoot from three. There's just a lot of things that he does that I think is going to make him an impact player on a playoff team. But sometimes, like, it takes two to tango. And I think that, not everyone always wants to tango, I guess.
Right. And I mean, a guy that PJ Washington could look towards kind of in the positive and the negative is in his Southeast division. That's John Collins, where John Collins, like, he went into that second contract with the Hawks not really knowing how to use him. And he ended up sticking around, got pretty good money. I mean, so, and how much that matters, John Collins, he's happy, but it seemed like he was dissatisfied with his role basically immediately. And that is, it is an opportunity. And I brought up Lonzo Ball before. Like, if you don't want to be where you are, as weird as it is, because the current team holds a lot of power, especially for these clearly not max guys, there can be a point where it's just too much trouble. And I mean, like the Pelicans, like, they made the playoffs last year. They have this very exciting future. If they had given, like, I think they're pretty thrilled they didn't give Lonzo Ball that contract. But so it kind of, in a way, it kind of worked out for everybody other than the injury. And so, like, maybe somebody like PJ Washington is looking at that and going, like, maybe it's that the Hornets are going to have this year and they're going to love me, but I want somebody to, and I want to have that opportunity. And the other part of it is, I'm sure a lot of these players.
And just real quick on the PJ thing before we move on to something else. Like, if I was the Hornets, I'd be like trying to sign PJ Washington, is why I bring this up. Because like you said, like, he's going to get a bigger role this year. He's going to get bigger responsibilities. He's going to get to start. Like, if we look up and he's a $20 million a year player at the end of this year, because he averaged 15 points and shot 40% from three and played good defense, that's like not surprising at all. He, like, frankly, like, has a chance to be like upgraded Grant Williams if he shoots well enough from three. And we've seen him shoot well enough from three previously at times in his career. So, like, someone like that is who Charlotte should be trying to get under but not everyone always wants to be involved with that.
Sure. And there also are circumstances where, you're trying to get a value because you're locking this up a year early. And I mean, that can be the team. Sometimes teams feel like they're negotiating from a position of strength because they don't have to do anything. They can just roll this in and they have match rights. And I think that tilts on its head a little bit as the cap is going up and you have these young teams that are looking to have cap space, especially. And this is the fun thing. You and I have talked about this in previous years. The more players sign extensions, especially the more high value players, the more stars can get in the eyes of the other players because they're not competing with Jordan Poole. They're not competing with Tyler Hero. They're just competing with players kind of their own level. And I could see P.J. Washington saying, I'm better than Grant Williams. I'm going to be starting. I'm going to get this. I could be the kind of the belle of the power forward ball in free agency next year. There aren't that many vets that are around. Like a team could see me as the best option that's available. Like potentially the Detroit Pistons. Like they could see that as, hey, he's a really talented offensive player. We could try him a little bit at a 5, but we have a couple of 5s already. Like you could see a number of different circumstances, teams that don't have locked in players there, and just why not? If all they're offering is, I'm not saying the Hornets did this, but if all they're offering is 10 million, like somebody's going to offer me that, and they might offer me a whole heck of a lot more.
Or even if they're offering him 15, like they're offering him like 460, like that, I probably would play my cards and see what happens in free agency. Or in some cases, your owner is selling the team after being having to deal with a pretty significant scandal of racism and misogyny within the organization. And Cam Johnson ends up kind of stuck out there, not necessarily getting even a real go at negotiations.
If there is one negotiation that I wish I could get a write-up of what each side was proposing, it would be Cam Johnson, because he's going to start on a team that even with all of their chaos should probably be pretty good. And there's a chance that his defensive limitations get exposed a little bit, but that's a pretty great opportunity. And also, like, the Suns are this massive ball of uncertainty in terms of their present, their future. How well do they age? Like, relative to expectations, they were the best team in the league last year in the regular season. Like, even if they win 10 games fewer, they're still a pretty good team. And how important is Cam Johnson to that? And also, like, who else is on the team other than Devin Booker? It's going to be, and probably Mikal Bridges. Like, the whole circumstance is going to be absolutely wild.
Well, here's the crazy thing about Cam Johnson too. Cam Johnson's going to turn 27 this summer.
Right.
So like this is his 1 year to get paid. Like
this is going to cover his entire prime. So you're probably going to get his 27, 28, 29, and 30 years, which by most accounts is a player's best time in basketball.
Right. So he needs to maximize his value. Like, honestly, like if Phoenix, look, I don't know this. If Phoenix like didn't even come to the table with an offer, that like wouldn't blow me away. Like, just say like, look, we're in the midst of some organizational changes right now. We think you're great. We're going to take it to restricted free agency next year and see what happens, because, we understand that you're a terrific player, but we're not in a place right now where we can offer you a deal that you're even going to consider. Like, wouldn't blow me away.
How much do you enjoy it that a lot of these guys who are now still on the wire for restricted free agency play similar positions and roles? Because we're gonna find out some preferences out there over the next year plus.
Yeah, totally. And then like, can you? Here's what we'll maybe close on. Can you figure out the Nasir Little deal? That one, he's basically taking like half of what the like mid-level exception has potential to be in the middle of that deal.
$7 million is still a lot of money, and the Blazers wouldn't budge. And I'm assuming this was player driven, not agent driven. And just is like, he's had some injuries and just said like, this is a lot of money. If I retire after this contract, if I'm out of the league, then I will have made a lot of money. And I hope and expect, like, I thought Nasir Little could very well be a starter this year for the Blazers. I wonder, I think he could be a starter in the near term. Like, there are a lot of different ways that Nasir Little is an impact player on Portland this year and moving forward. So I'm very surprised that he accepted this. But the important thing to remember about this, I always talk about how like the only mistake that players make, and this is more unrestricted free agency, is like not being true to themselves. And so if he wants to take this money right now, more power to him, but I think he could have gotten a whole heck of a lot more a year from now.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that one thing that's worth considering in his case is he is still just 22.
Yeah.
He'll hit restricted free agency again. Like this,
he'll be young.
unrestricted
So
free
Nasir
agency.
Little will be younger when he starts his third contract than Cam Johnson will be when he starts his second.
Yeah. So that does make his life a little bit easier in terms of decision making on a lot of this stuff. Like it will, hopefully he'll be able to establish himself and be a great player and be something of value. And this is a bargain for Portland, because if it's a bargain for Portland, that means that he's going to be able to hit restricted or hit unrestricted free agency when he's 26 and be good and still get the money he needs. So, right. Sometimes it's just worth, getting the security while also betting on yourself to be great down the road. I don't know. That's the $7 million a year is a number that caught my eye though.
Oh yeah. Sure. I mean, that was the most stunning extension that anyone signed.
Yeah. Do you have any other thoughts here before I let you go?
I on a similar line, I was surprised that Brandon Clark took basically, a little over $10 million a year on the idea that that's solid backup money. And it's security. You locked it up. I think his restricted free agency contract would have been in that same ballpark, would have been between 10 and 14. And so you get it a year early. That's good. And then also for Memphis, like I had talked about them as being like the sleeping giant of they had this like 18-month window and they locked in another player. And now it is difficult to do something with Brandon Clark before the offseason next year. And it seems more likely that Zach Kleiman and this Memphis front office is intending to keep this team moving forward.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, they, in the last month basically got rid of 23 million in potential cap space, because they're like basically right on the number projected for next year in terms of what the salary cap is. So, they could have opened up 23 million very easily next year, which means if you can open up 23 million easily, you can open up a max cap space pretty easily, given just the way that the salary cap works now. So like, it's interesting that that's the road they're going down. Not to say good or bad. It's just that they're making a clear decision to bet on the guys that they've invested in already.
Exactly. And we'll have to see how that works out. And they do have a very young core, but my concern as a Grizzlies believer, as somebody who in a matter of hours is going to pick them to finish first in the Western Conference this year, regular season record, is I think their young core is fantastic. I don't know that the surrounding talent is good enough for the eventuality that I want for them of like NBA finals and all that type of stuff. And like Steven Adams, Dylan Brooks, and hopefully some of these other guys get there. And I think that one of the biggest mistakes that front offices can get into is thinking that being where they are is good enough to reach the rarefied air. And generally speaking, it takes a whole heck of a lot to get there.
I'm sorry. I'm still just picking my jaw up off the floor that you think the Grizzlies are going to win the West this year.
I think they're going to have the best regular season record in the West. I don't think they're going to win. I don't think they're going to win the conference. Yeah.
Without Jaren Jackson for the first couple months, even.
Yeah, it's fine. I think they'll handle it.
That is amazing. Mm-hmm. I love that.
Also, like
give me a case for it. I need to hear it. Like, then we'll let you go. But I got to get this case.
I can't remember the exact numbers, but I think Ja Morant missed like 20 to 25 games last year. Dylan Brooks missed 50, and they have enough talent to weather the Jaren Jackson absence. I've also I think it's going to be shorter than some fear. I think I'm thinking more like a month and a half to 2 months, and. The Grizzlies, with the intensity they play with and the depth of their talent, even though losing Melton and Kyle Anderson sucks. Like I love those guys. I wish they were still on the team. They're going to run through bad teams. Like I think even shorthanded, they should. I mean, Ja's a monster. They've got all these other different things working for them. Desmond Bane, I think, is going to take another step forward. And then they have kind of unusual pieces that I think will give the mid-level team stress, especially when the Grizzlies are at home. And then they'll take their share against good teams. I mean, they gave the Warriors, I would argue they gave the Warriors a better fight than anyone in the West did. And that was with, at part times, an injured Ja Morant. And so I think I think about the bones. Matt Moore talks about this well too, of like what makes a team win a bunch of regular season games. And it's beating every bad team, beating most of the mid-level teams, and then holding your own against the top teams. I think Memphis is going to do all of those as long as Ja Morant stays remotely healthy.
Yeah, I kind of made the case on the last podcast. I think Ja's going to be first team All NBA. That was like one of my like takes for the league this year. I made the case that like it's going to be easier to sop up the minutes that they lost by DeAnthony Melton and Kyle Anderson than what people think.
Mm-hmm.
Like, also John Conchar like might be as good as DeAnthony Melton, like period, which makes it easier.
Well, and even so, I love DeAnthony Melton, but the marginal difference between him and like a pretty good version of him for the minutes they were asking of Melton just isn't that big. I love the guy, and I think he's going to help the Sixers a lot. It's not like,
yeah, me too. Yeah,
it's not like you're replacing Ja. And like, remember, like they did really well defensively when Morant was off before, and part of that was Jaren Jackson. Like Jaren had a really good year, but I believe in Taylor Jenkins as a coach. I believe in a lot of what they're doing there, and I think they're going to be really good. I'll give you two other juicy ones just because I was working on my preseason predictions right before. Like, I think there's a meaningful chance that Minnesota ends the season with the best regular season record in the West too.
Yeah.
They have a lot to
on the last episode as well.
They have a lot to figure out offensively, and that game against the Nets does give me pause. But the fundamentals there are actually really intriguing. And then the other one is, I did over-unders with Arturo Galletti for Real GM Radio, is I think Stephen Curry is incredibly undervalued for regular season MVP. Because there is an argument that if he's healthy, he's the best offensive player, and he doesn't have some of the other defensive negatives. Warriors could win a bunch of games this year. And like, I think that they like the idea that if Steph and Luka have similarly good offensive seasons, that people are just going to pick Luka when his team might have a worse record and everything else is just, I think it's intriguing that their odds are so far apart.
Yeah, I agree with that. I also think the Warriors are going to be very good now. I've like come like all the way around on this where like I was a little bit worried previously, but now I just think they're going to be awesome. I think we're going to get like a defensive player of the year, Draymond Green, for 65 to 75 games. And then we're going to get great Wiggins, great Poole, as much as we can get out of Clay. Plus they're deeper than they were last year. I think they have like a non-zero chance at 60 wins.
Wow. I just don't know how hard they're going to push, but they're going to be a really, really good team.
Yeah. Like the thing is like, even if you sit Dre for, 15 games or whatever, and you sit like the guy you can't really sit as Steph, but like they now have the depth, I think, to like make up for Klay Thompson missing time.
But when you sit Steph, you sit him against the 5 worst teams in the league. And you probably can still beat them and stop them defensively. You play Jordan Poole a lot more, give some of these guys some latitude. And I mean, if Steve Kerr listened to me, that's the thing I would start basically as soon as the season begins, of like with the teams that we think was the 5 worst in the league, unless unless it's a really specific circumstance, like you have days off on both ends, just sit them. You'll be fine.
It's a good question. Like what does their schedule look like to where they can start like messing around with playing Steph like fewer minutes? So like they're actually like kind of loaded at the start of the year. They played the Lakers, Nuggets, Kings, Suns, Heat. You probably have to play him in all those games, but like, and then you're going to play him in Charlotte because he won't want to sit for a Charlotte game, I don't think. But like they have a back-to-back on Sunday, the 30th against the Pistons. Like, do you sit them against the Pistons that day? Maybe, right?
Or you play them the first half, and if you're up by 15 or more, then maybe you have a little bit more latitude there moving forward. And they have a back-to-back where the second game is against the Rockets in early December. Like you could start this train a little bit earlier. And I'm interested, especially, I mean, you and I have talked a lot about Wembanyama and Scoot Henderson. If these teams are aggressively kind of going in that direction, especially for Chase Center home games, and they're just like, they're just kind of tucked in, and you're just like, okay, they can, I mean, Jordan Poole is good enough that if he's their lead creator, they'll beat these teams.
Yeah. So they play the Spurs in a back-to-back at home on November 14th.
Mm-hmm.
That's one where if Steph plays that game, like, I think I would be surprised, right?
I wouldn't be surprised just because it's so early in the season, and other than Popovich, coaches just haven't been that proactive yet. And Curry's not Kawhi Leonard, where I don't know that Kawhi's going to play to back-to-back the rest of his career. But Yeah, and Curry wants to be out there, but yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
this is something I would urge just to keep him fresh, and you're taking out. I mean, especially because some of Curry's injuries have been so random, like the wet spot on the
Right.
floor or Marcus Smart diving into his leg, and I mean that can happen to anybody, but the amount of time you're on the floor, it's just risk. It's the bad things can happen and great things can too, but the bad things are what scare you.
Yeah, definitely. Danny, tell the people where they can find your work. Tell the people what you've got coming.
I got a lot of stuff. I mean, Dunked On and Dunked On, which is really Dunked On Prime. We've also added John Hollinger, which is really great and great work from Dan Feldman. So that is the subscription part of it. And then we release a free episode every week. Real GM Radio is the podcast I do weekly. It's an interview. Sam is on it fairly frequently, and lots of great guests. And then Nate and I are doing the NBA Strategy Stream, which is the show that we do with NBA League Pass. That is roughly weekly. We're going to be fiddling around a little bit with the dates, but we call the game. You can watch it. It's a great experience. It was our dream when we started this 6 years to make it happen. And it's been a lot of fun, and we might do some other stuff too. So keep an eye on my Twitter at Danny Leroux.
Danny's the best. I couldn't be more excited that he agreed to do this. We will be back here in a minute with Kelly Eco breaking down the weird Kevin Porter deal, because I had to talk to him yesterday just because that deal completely broke my brain and I just needed to talk to someone about it.